At Thunderbolt Air Force Base outside Las Vegas, they called her Sparrow. Not because she was small and quick, though at 5'4" Lieutenant Sarah Chen was among the shortest pilots in the squadron. They called her Sparrow because during her first week of fighter training, when asked about her aerial combat philosophy, she'd quietly said she preferred precision over power, patience over aggression. Like a sparrow watching for the right moment, she'd explained. The room had erupted in laughter. Real fighter pilots were eagles, hawks, predators that dominated the sky through sheer force and intimidation. Sparrows were prey. What none of them knew as they mocked her gentle Callsign was that within 18 months, this quiet pilot with the laughable nickname would rack up more confirmed air-to-air victories than any pilot in modern Air Force history, becoming a legend whispered about in fighter squadrons across 3 continents. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The Nevada sun blazed mercilessly across the tarmac of Thunderbolt Air Force Base as Lieutenant Sarah Chen walked toward her assigned F-16 Fighting Falcon, her helmet, bag slung over one shoulder, and a worn leather flight jacket that had belonged to her grandfather draped over the other arm. The base, officially designated as the Advanced Fighter Weapons School, served as the Air Force's premier training facility for elite combat pilots. Here, the best of the best came to hone their skills in the most sophisticated aircraft the military could provide. The sprawling complex of hangars, runways, and training facilities stretched across thousands of acres of desert, where the clear skies and restricted airspace provided perfect conditions for pushing both pilots and machines to their absolute limits. Sarah's arrival at Thunderbolt hadn't been met with the typical fanfare accorded to incoming pilots. At 26, she was older than most new graduates from pilot training, having taken a circuitous route to the cockpit that included a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering and 2 years working as a civilian contractor, before finally earning her wings. Her personnel file showed solid but unspectacular grades from flight school, competent but not outstanding performance reviews, and a recommendation that described her as methodical and technically proficient, though lacking the aggressive instincts typically associated with air superiority fighters. The other pilots in her squadron, the 314th Fighter Squadron, known as the Desert Hawks, had initially been curious about their new wingmen. That curiosity had quickly transformed into bemused dismissal when they learned about her unconventional background and quiet demeanor. Fighter pilots, especially those elite enough to be stationed at Thunderbolt, were typically larger-than-life personalities who attacked everything with the same aggressive confidence they brought to aerial combat. Sarah's soft-spoken manner and thoughtful approach to briefings stood in stark contrast to the swagger and bravado that permeated squadron culture. Major Rick "Viper" Morrison commanded the Desert Hawks with the kind of intimidating presence that had made him a legend in Air Force circles. A veteran of 3 combat deployments with 17 confirmed air-to-air victories, Morrison stood 6'2" with shoulders that filled out his flight suit impressively. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, and his reputation for breaking pilots who couldn't meet his impossibly high standards was well documented throughout the Air Force. When Morrison had been briefed about Sarah's assignment to his squadron, he'd made his feelings clear to anyone within earshot. "They're sending me a desk jockey who thinks she can dogfight. This ought to be entertaining." Captain Jake "Lightning" Rodriguez served as Morrison's second-in-command and shared his commander's skepticism about their new pilot. Rodriguez had earned his Callsign during a spectacular demonstration flight where he'd performed an unauthorized barrel roll during a formation pass over a graduation ceremony, nearly colliding with 2 other aircraft in the process. The stunt had cost him a promotion but cemented his reputation as a pilot who lived on the edge. His first conversation with Sarah had been brief and dismissive. "Hope you're better at flying than you are at making first impressions, Sparrow." We don't have time to babysit rookies who got their wings from a Cracker Jack box. The squadron's other pilots had quickly fallen in line with their leadership's assessment. Captain Maria Phoenix Vasquez, one of only 3 female pilots in the unit, had initially hoped to find an ally in Sarah, but had been disappointed by what she perceived as weakness. "If you want to survive in this business," Phoenix had told Sarah during their first encounter in the ready room, "you need to project strength from day one. That whole quiet, thoughtful act might work in engineering, but it'll get you killed up here." Her advice had been delivered with the hard edge of someone who'd fought for every ounce of respect she'd earned in a male-dominated profession. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Hammer Johnson oversaw pilot evaluations at Thunderbolt, and his initial assessment of Sarah had been politely professional, but ultimately damning. Johnson had seen hundreds of pilots come through the advanced training program, and he prided himself on being able to identify future aces within their first few flights. His preliminary report on Sarah noted her adequate technical knowledge and satisfactory aircraft handling skills, but questioned whether she possessed the killer instinct necessary for air-to-air combat operations. The evaluation would prove to be one of the most spectacularly wrong assessments in Air Force history. Sarah's assigned aircraft was F-16C tail number 870257, a Fighting Falcon with over 3,000 flight hours and a maintenance history that read like a catalog of mechanical problems. The jet had been cycled through multiple pilots, none of whom had requested to keep it for extended periods. Its ejection seat had been rebuilt twice. The radar system required constant calibration, and the heads-up display flickered intermittently during high-G maneuvers. Other pilots referred to it as the Hangar Queen and considered assignment to Aircraft 257 as barely disguised punishment duty. Sarah accepted the assignment without complaint, spending her off-duty hours studying the jet's technical manuals and maintenance logs with the same methodical attention she brought to everything else. The squadron's daily routine revolved around increasingly complex training scenarios designed to simulate real-world combat conditions. Morning briefings covered threat assessments, tactical scenarios, and aircraft capabilities, while afternoon debriefs analyzed performance and identified areas for improvement. Sarah attended these sessions religiously, taking detailed notes and asking thoughtful questions that often revealed gaps in standard operating procedures. Her contributions were technically sound but delivered with a quiet confidence that her squadron mates interpreted as uncertainty or lack of conviction. During her first month at Thunderbolt, Sarah's flight performance had been competent but unremarkable. She flew by the book, followed procedures precisely, and never took risks that might endanger herself or her wingmen. Her aerial gunnery scores were in the acceptable range. Her formation flying was textbook perfect, and her emergency procedures handling was flawless. By every measurable standard, she was a capable pilot. What concerned her instructors and squadron mates was her apparent lack of the aggressive edge they believed essential for air combat success. The squadron's informal, social hierarchy placed Sarah firmly at the bottom, a position reinforced by countless small interactions and casual dismissals. When pilots gathered at the officers' club after flights, conversations would often die when she approached, not out of malice but from a genuine uncertainty about what to discuss with someone who seemed so different from themselves. Her attempts to contribute to tactical discussions were politely acknowledged but rarely built upon, creating an atmosphere of professional isolation that would have broken many pilots. What none of her squadron mates knew was that Sarah spent her evenings in the base library, studying historical air combat accounts and analyzing the tactics employed by legendary fighter pilots throughout aviation history. She'd developed a particular fascination with pilots who'd achieved success through unconventional means, studying the careers of aces who'd relied on patience, positioning, and precise timing rather than raw aggression. Her notebook contained detailed analyses of energy management, deflection shooting techniques, and situational awareness principles that went far beyond standard Air Force doctrine. Sarah's grandfather, Colonel James Chun, had been a P-51 Mustang pilot during World War II, credited with 12 confirmed victories over Europe before being shot down during the final months of the war. He'd survived 18 months as a prisoner of war and returned home with stories that had shaped Sarah's understanding of aerial combat from childhood. His leather flight jacket, now worn by Sarah, contained a small notebook filled with his handwritten observations about air combat tactics, many of which contradicted modern training philosophy. "The loudest pilot in the briefing room," he'd written, "is rarely the most dangerous one in the sky." The advanced training program at Thunderbolt was structured around progressive challenges designed to identify and develop the next generation of combat leaders. Pilots who excelled would be selected for the most prestigious assignments: test, pilot school, weapons school instructor positions, or deployment to forward combat zones, where their skills would be put to the ultimate test. Those who failed to meet standards would be reassigned to transport duties, training commands, or early separation from military service. For Sarah, the stakes were particularly high given the skepticism surrounding her assignment to the squadron major. Morrison had made it clear that he intended to evaluate Sarah with the same rigorous standards applied to every pilot under his command, but his informal comments suggested he expected her to wash out before completing the program. "Some people are natural-born killers in the air," he'd told the squadron during an informal gathering, "and others are better suited to cargo, planes and desk jobs. Time will tell which category Sparrow falls into." The nickname had stuck, used by everyone from maintenance crews to base commanders, always with the subtle implication that she was somehow less than her peers. As Sarah prepared for what would become the most important phase of her training, she carried with her the accumulated weight of months of subtle dismissal and professional skepticism. Her quiet confidence remained intact, but the pressure to prove herself had intensified with each passing day. The advanced aerial combat exercises, scheduled to begin the following week, would finally provide the opportunity she'd been waiting for: a chance to demonstrate that effectiveness in air combat wasn't always measured by the volume of one's voice or the aggressiveness of one's approach. The evening sun cast long shadows across the flight line as Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection of aircraft 257. Her movements methodical and unhurried despite the scrutiny of passing squadron members. Tomorrow would bring the first of the advanced combat scenarios, and with it the beginning of a transformation that would shock everyone who'd ever dismissed the quiet pilot they called Sparrow. The morning briefing room at Thunderbolt Air Force Base buzzed with the confident chatter of elite pilots as they gathered for the announcement of the Advanced Combat Training Program. Major Morrison stood at the front of the room, beside a large tactical display showing various aircraft configurations and weapon systems, his expression serious as he surveyed the assembled Desert Hawk squadron. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the faces of pilots who had spent years preparing for this moment, each believing they possessed the skills necessary to excel in the most demanding aerial combat scenarios the Air Force could devise. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice cutting through the conversation like a blade, "what you're about to undertake will separate the future squadron commanders from the future cargo haulers. The Advanced Air Combat Training Program represents the pinnacle of fighter pilot education, designed to identify and develop the Air Force's next generation of aerial warfare experts." He clicked a remote control, bringing up a detailed schematic of the training progression on the main screen. "Over the next 6 weeks, you'll face increasingly complex scenarios that will test every aspect of your flying ability, tactical knowledge, and combat instincts." Sarah sat in the back row of the briefing room, her notebook open and pen ready, as she had been for every briefing since arriving at Thunderbolt. Around her, the other pilots leaned back in their chairs with the casual confidence of natural predators, many of them having already distinguished themselves in previous training programs or actual combat deployments. Captain Rodriguez cracked his knuckles audibly. Captain Vasquez adjusted her flight suit with practiced ease, and several other pilots exchanged knowing glances that suggested they viewed the upcoming challenges as mere formalities before receiving their expected accolades. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson stepped forward to outline the specific phases of the training program, his tone clinical and professional as he described scenarios that had been developed based on actual combat experiences from recent conflicts around the globe. Phase 1 will focus on basic air-to-air combat maneuvering against both similar and dissimilar aircraft types, he explained, highlighting different sections of the tactical display. You'll face opponents flying everything from F-16s and F-15s to foreign aircraft types operated by contract aggressor squadrons. Success will be measured not just by kill ratios, but by tactical decision-making, situational awareness, and adherence to engagement protocols. The briefing continued with detailed explanations of scoring systems, safety procedures, and evaluation criteria that would determine each pilot's final ranking in the program. Sarah took meticulous notes, paying particular attention to the rules of engagement and the tactical parameters that would govern each phase of training. While her squadron mates seemed to view the briefing as a necessary formality before the real action began, she understood that understanding the framework of competition was often as important as raw flying skill in determining outcomes. Phase 2 will introduce electronic warfare elements, Johnson continued, including radar jamming, communication disruption, and degraded navigation systems. You'll learn to fight and win when your technological advantages have been neutralized or turned against you. This announcement drew murmurs of interest from several pilots who had built their reputations on mastering advanced avionics systems. For Sarah, who had already spent considerable time studying backup instruments and manual navigation techniques, this phase represented less of a paradigm shift than it would for pilots accustomed to fighting with full electronic support. Third and final phase was described in terms that made even the most confident pilots sit up and take notice. Phase 3 consists of large force exercises involving multiple squadrons, simulated surface-to-air threats, and complex mission objectives that require unprecedented levels of coordination and tactical flexibility. Morrison explained, his expression growing more serious. This is where we separate pilots who can win individual dogfights from those who can control and dominate entire battle spaces. The top graduates from this program will be selected for immediate deployment to preconference from this prominence with the cloth. Active combat zones, or assignment to the most classified and demanding positions in the Air Force. Following the formal briefing, pilots were assigned to their initial opponent pairings and given time to study their first tactical scenarios. Sarah found herself paired against Captain Rodriguez for her opening engagement, a matchup that drew snickers from several squadron members who viewed it as an obvious mismatch. Rodriguez had earned his reputation as one of the most aggressive and skilled dogfighters in the Air Force, with a style that emphasized high-speed maneuvering and relentless offensive pressure. His approach to air combat was the antithesis of Sarah's methodical philosophy, making their upcoming encounter a clash of fundamentally different fighting styles. "Don't take it personally when I smoke you, Sparrow," Rodriguez said with a grin as he reviewed the engagement parameters on his tablet. "Nothing against you personally, but this is what separates the wheat from the chaff. Some people are natural-born killers in the air, and others are better suited to flying cargo planes or working desk jobs." His comment was delivered with casual confidence rather than malice, reflecting a genuine belief that the outcome of their engagement was predetermined by their respective backgrounds and approaches to flying. The other pilots gathered around Rodriguez as he outlined his strategy for the upcoming fight, sharing tactical insights and offering suggestions for dealing with what they perceived as Sarah's overly cautious flying style. The key with pilots like that offered Captain Vasquez, is to press the attack immediately and never give them time to think. Aggressive pilots control the pace of the fight, and once you're reacting instead of acting, you're already beaten. The informal strategy session continued for several minutes, with various squadron members contributing their expertise to what they viewed as a teaching opportunity rather than a competitive match. Sarah listened to these discussions while continuing to study the engagement parameters and aircraft performance data that would govern their upcoming aerial combat. Her approach to preparation differed markedly from her squadron mates' confident strategizing. Instead of focusing primarily on offensive tactics, she devoted equal attention to defensive maneuvering, energy management, and the specific performance characteristics of both her aircraft and Rodriguez's. Her notebook filled with calculations related to turn rates, climb performance, and fuel consumption patterns that would influence the tactical options available during different phases of the engagement. The squadron's maintenance personnel had gathered around aircraft 257 when Sarah arrived for her pre-flight inspection, their expressions mixing professional curiosity with barely concealed skepticism about the upcoming aerial combat demonstration. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, the crew chief responsible for Sarah's aircraft, had worked on fighters for 15 years and prided himself on understanding the relationship between pilot capability and aircraft performance. "She's all yours, Lieutenant," he said, gesturing toward the F-16 with a tone that suggested he was delivering a funeral oration rather than releasing an aircraft for combat training. "Any issues I should know about?" Sarah asked, beginning her systematic inspection of the aircraft's external systems and weapons configurations. Her pre-flight routine was notably more thorough than that of most pilots, involving detailed examinations of control surfaces, sensor systems, and weapon mounting points that many pilots would trust to maintenance personnel. This methodical approach had initially been viewed as a sign of inexperience or lack of confidence, but the maintenance crews had come to appreciate her attention to detail and genuine interest in understanding her aircraft's capabilities and limitations. Torres consulted his maintenance log before responding. "Radar's been giving us some intermittent issues during high-G maneuvers, and the heads-up display occasionally flickers when you pull more than 7 Gs. Nothing that'll kill you, but it might affect your situational awareness during aggressive maneuvering." He paused, studying Sarah's reaction to this information. Most pilots would request a different aircraft for something this important, but I guess you're stuck with what you've got. "She'd do fine," Sarah replied, running her hand along the aircraft's wing route with the familiarity of someone who had spent countless hours studying every aspect of her assigned machine. "I'd rather fly an aircraft I know intimately than a perfect one I'm unfamiliar with." This philosophy reflected her broader approach to air combat, which emphasized working within known limitations rather than relying on technological superiority or overwhelming force. Her confidence in the aging F-16 surprised Torres, who had expected complaints or requests for different equipment. The flight line buzzed with activity as other pilots prepared for their own training sorties, the sound of jet engines spooling up, creating a constant background roar that had become as familiar as breathing to everyone stationed at Thunderbolt. Sarah's preparation routine remained unhurried, despite the obvious anticipation surrounding her upcoming engagement with Rodriguez. She completed her external inspection, reviewed her mission materials one final time, and began the process of strapping into the cockpit with the same methodical precision she brought to every aspect of flying. Rodriguez had already started his engines and was conducting his system checks with the aggressive efficiency that characterized everything he did. His F-16 was one of the squadron's newest aircraft, equipped with the latest avionics upgrades and maintained to perfect mechanical standards. The contrast between his gleaming, high-performance machine and Sarah's older, problem-prone aircraft was lost on no one watching the preparation process. Several pilots had gathered near the squadron operations building to observe the launch and monitor radio communications during the engagement, their presence adding an element of public scrutiny to what was already a high-stakes demonstration. "Sparrow Lightning, you're cleared for departure," announced the control tower as both aircraft received permission to taxi to the active runway. Sarah's response was crisp and professional, acknowledging the clearance while beginning the taxi process with smooth, controlled inputs that demonstrated her technical competence, even during routine ground operations. Rodriguez's aircraft moved with more aggressive urgency, his taxi speed and control inputs reflecting the same attacking mentality that defined his approach to aerial combat. As both fighters reached the runway threshold and received clearance for takeoff, the assembled spectators prepared to witness what many expected would be a brief and one-sided demonstration of the difference between aggressive combat pilots and methodical technicians. The roar of afterburners split the desert air as both aircraft accelerated down the runway, climbing rapidly into the clear Nevada sky where the first phase of Sarah's transformation from dismissed outsider to aerial predator would begin to unfold. Radio chatter between the two aircraft and the controlling agencies crackled with professional terminology and tactical communications that would soon give way to the intense focus of simulated air combat. In her cockpit, Sarah ran through her final systems checks while mentally preparing for an engagement that would either validate months of quiet preparation or confirm her squadron's assessment of her limitations as a combat pilot. The clear Nevada sky stretched endlessly in all directions as both F-16s climbed to their assigned altitude of 25,000 feet, the desert landscape shrinking beneath them into a patchwork of brown and tan that extended to the horizon. Sarah's aircraft leveled off first, her smooth control inputs maintaining perfect altitude while she began the systematic process of configuring her systems for air-to-air combat. The intermittent radar issues Staff Sergeant Torres had warned her about manifested almost immediately, causing brief gaps in her threat detection coverage that would have concerned most pilots facing an opponent of Rodriguez's caliber. Thunderbolt control, Lightning is established at Angels 2-5, ready for engagement. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio with the confident tone of a pilot who had never doubted the outcome of an aerial combat scenario. His F-16 had climbed aggressively to altitude, the powerful thrust of his perfectly tuned engine allowing him to reach the engagement zone several seconds before Sarah's older aircraft. Those precious seconds of positional advantage would typically translate into tactical superiority, giving the faster climbing pilot the opportunity to establish an advantageous geometry before the engagement officially began. Sparrow was also established and ready, Sarah responded, her voice calm and measured despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. Her aircraft had required an extra 30 seconds to reach the prescribed altitude, a delay that placed her at an immediate disadvantage in terms of energy state and tactical positioning. Rodriguez had used that time to maneuver into what appeared to be an optimal attack position, his aircraft configured for maximum performance and positioned to exploit any weakness in Sarah's defensive capabilities. The engagement zone was a carefully defined cube of airspace measuring 50 nautical miles on each side, with specific altitude floors and ceilings that would contain the aerial combat while ensuring separation from civilian air traffic and other military operations. Within this invisible arena, both pilots would be free to maneuver as aggressively as their skills and aircraft capabilities allowed, limited only by safety considerations and the rules of engagement that governed training exercises at Thunderbolt. The scoring system would track simulated weapons employment, tactical decision-making, and overall mission effectiveness through sophisticated computer modeling and direct observation by airborne controllers. "Fighters, this is Wizard," announced the airborne controller aboard an E-3 AWACS aircraft orbiting at high altitude above the engagement zone. "Your exercise is now hot. Engage when ready, weapons tight until cleared to fire." The formal commencement of hostilities triggered an immediate transformation in both aircraft as their pilots shifted from routine flight operations to the heightened awareness and split-second decision-making demanded by air combat. Every movement, every radio call, and every tactical choice from this moment forward would be recorded and analyzed for both training purposes and performance evaluation. Rodriguez wasted no time implementing his aggressive strategy immediately, turning towards Sarah's aircraft and accelerating to maximum speed in a classic offensive maneuver designed to close the distance and force an immediate confrontation. His approach was textbook perfect, utilizing superior energy state and positioning to dictate the terms of engagement, while denying his opponent time to develop defensive countermeasures. The tactic had served him well throughout his career, overwhelming less aggressive pilots through sheer audacity and superior aircraft handling skills. Sarah's response appeared hesitant to the observers monitoring the engagement from the ground. Instead of turning to meet Rodriguez's attack head-on or attempting to escape through defensive maneuvering, she maintained her current heading while making subtle adjustments to her aircraft's configuration and energy state. Her movements seemed almost passive compared to Rodriguez's dynamic offensive rush, leading several watching pilots to exchange knowing glances that suggested the engagement would conclude quickly and decisively in Lightning's favor. "Come on, Sparrow," Rodriguez's voice carried over the radio with casual confidence. "Don't make this too easy. At least try to put up a fight." His comment violated radio discipline protocols, but reflected the informal atmosphere that often characterized training engagements between squadron mates. The taunt was intended more as encouragement than mockery, though it demonstrated Rodriguez's complete confidence in his ability to dominate the engagement. Regardless of Sarah's tactical choices or defensive capabilities, the first missile launch simulation occurred exactly as most observers had predicted, with Rodriguez achieving a favorable firing position and employment parameters that should have resulted in an immediate kill. His aircraft's advanced radar had locked onto Sarah's F-16, despite her defensive electronic countermeasures, and the simulated AIM-12 OMRAAM launch met all the technical criteria for a successful engagement. The computer systems monitoring the exercise calculated missile flight time, probability of hit, and defensive options available to the target aircraft with mathematical precision that left little room for uncertainty about the projected outcome. Sarah's defensive response surprised everyone monitoring the engagement, including Rodriguez himself. Instead of employing standard defensive maneuvers like chaff deployment, radical direction changes, or attempts to break the radar lock through electronic jamming, she executed a complex series of energy management techniques that seemed to defy conventional tactical wisdom. Her aircraft's speed and altitude changed in subtle increments that appeared almost random to casual observers, but created a flight profile that gradually degraded the simulated missile's terminal guidance effectiveness. "What the hell is she doing?" muttered Captain Vasquez from the Squadron Operations Center, where pilots not currently flying were monitoring the engagement through radio communications and radar displays. Sarah's defensive maneuvering didn't match any standard tactical doctrine taught at pilot training or weapons school, yet the computer simulations were registering a progressively decreasing probability of hit for Rodriguez's simulated missile. The unconventional approach was working, though none of the observing pilots could immediately understand the underlying principles governing Sarah's tactical choices. The simulated missile impact never materialized. Through a combination of precise timing, energy management, and exploitation of the missile's guidance limitations, Sarah had successfully defeated Rodriguez's first attack without resorting to dramatic defensive maneuvers that would have depleted her aircraft's energy state. The computer system registered a clean miss, marking the first time in recent memory that Rodriguez had failed to achieve a kill with his opening gambit against a fellow squadron member. "Negative impact, negative impact," announced the AWACS controller. confirming what the participants and observers were already seeing on their displays. Lightning shot is evaluated as a miss. Continue the engagement. The announcement was met with stunned silence from the ground observers, who had expected to be analyzing Sarah's defensive mistakes rather than witnessing Rodriguez's first failed attack in months of training exercises. Rodriguez's confidence began to show the first microscopic cracks as he maneuvered for a second attack. His initial assault had been executed flawlessly according to every tactical principle he'd learned throughout his career. Yet his opponent had somehow survived through methods that seemed to violate basic laws of physics and missile guidance technology. The confusion was evident in his slightly more aggressive radio communications and the subtle desperation creeping into his maneuvering as he attempted to regain the initiative he'd assumed would be his from the engagement's opening moments. Sarah's aircraft had maintained most of its energy during the defensive sequence, a fact that became increasingly important as the engagement transitioned from Rodriguez's planned quick kill to an extended maneuvering contest. Her methodical approach to energy management, which had seemed overly cautious during routine training flights, now revealed itself as a sophisticated understanding of the mathematical relationships governing air combat physics. Every maneuver served multiple purposes, conserving fuel while maintaining optimal airspeeds and positioning her aircraft for potential counterattacks. The second phase of the engagement began with Rodriguez attempting to force a close-range maneuvering contest, where his superior aircraft performance and aggressive flying style would provide decisive advantages. He pulled his F-16 into a steep climbing turn designed to position himself above and behind Sarah's aircraft, a classic maneuver that should have granted him both tactical and positional superiority. His execution was technically perfect, demonstrating the skills that had made him one of the squadron's most respected pilots. Sarah's response once again defied conventional expectations. Instead of attempting to outturn Rodriguez or engaging in the energy-depleting maneuvering contest he was trying to initiate, she executed a series of precise barrel rolls and altitude changes that kept her aircraft positioned just outside his optimal firing envelope. Her movements appeared almost choreographed, as if she had anticipated his tactical choices and prepared specific countermeasures designed to neutralize his advantages without expending unnecessary energy or placing her aircraft in vulnerable positions. The engagement continued for several more minutes, with Rodriguez becoming increasingly frustrated by his inability to achieve firing solutions against an opponent who seemed to anticipate his every move. His attacks were textbook perfect, his aircraft handling was flawless, and his tactical decision-making reflected years of experience in training. Yet Sarah continued to evade, counter, and position herself defensively through methods that none of the observing pilots could fully comprehend or explain. "Wizard, Lightning is requesting to knock it off," Rodriguez finally transmitted, using the standard call to terminate the training engagement. His fuel state remained adequate for continued maneuvering, but his inability to achieve even a single successful attack against an opponent the entire squadron had expected him to defeat quickly was becoming increasingly apparent to everyone monitoring the exercise. The request came not from tactical necessity, but from the growing realization that continuing the engagement would only compound his embarrassment. "Roger, Lightning Sparrow, knock it off, knock it off," the WACS controller responded, officially terminating the aerial combat exercise. Return to base for debrief. Exercise terminated at time 47. The formal conclusion of hostilities was met with silence from both aircraft as their pilots began the process of returning to Thunderbolt Air Force Base, each contemplating the implications of an engagement that had unfolded in ways no one had anticipated. As both F-16s descended toward the Nevada desert and configured their aircraft for landing, the observers on the ground struggled to process what they had witnessed. Rodriguez, one of the squadron's most skilled and aggressive pilots, had failed to achieve a single successful attack against a pilot they had collectively dismissed as inadequate for air combat operations. The engagement had lasted nearly 15 minutes without a single simulated kill, an outcome that challenged fundamental assumptions about aerial combat effectiveness and pilot capability. The squadron ready room buzzed with uncomfortable tension as pilots gathered for the mandatory post-flight debrief, their usual confident chatter replaced by confused whispers and sideways glances toward the large tactical display that would soon reveal the detailed analysis of Sarah's engagement with Rodriguez. Major Morrison stood at the front of the room, with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he studied the preliminary data streaming in from the exercise controllers. The atmosphere felt charged with the kind of electric uncertainty that followed unexpected events, when established hierarchies and assumptions suddenly appeared less solid than they had seemed just hours before. Rodriguez entered the ready room with forced casualness, his flight suit still bearing the sweat stains of intensive maneuvering and his usually confident swagger noticeably subdued. He took his customary seat near the front of the room but avoided making eye contact with his squadron mates, instead focusing intently on his debriefing notes as if they contained secrets that might explain his failure to achieve even a single successful attack against an opponent everyone had expected him to dominate completely. The pilot who had never shown uncertainty about anything related to flying now appeared genuinely shaken by an outcome that challenged his understanding of aerial combat fundamentals. Sarah entered several minutes later, her demeanor as calm and professional as always, showing no visible signs of the triumph or vindication that might have been expected from someone who had just achieved the impossible. She carried the same worn notebook she brought to every briefing, the same methodical approach to documentation that her squadron mates had learned to associate with excessive caution rather than tactical preparation. Her quiet entrance drew every eye in the room, but she seemed oblivious to the scrutiny as she found an empty seat in the back row and prepared to participate in the debrief with her typical understated professionalism. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson stepped to the front of the room, carrying a tablet loaded with telemetry data, computer simulations, and video recordings from multiple angles that would provide an objective analysis of every moment of the aerial engagement. His expression mixed professional curiosity with obvious bewilderment as he began setting up the presentation equipment that would allow the entire squadron to examine exactly how Sarah had managed to neutralize every one of Rodriguez's attacks through methods that defied conventional tactical wisdom. The data promised to reveal insights that might revolutionize the squadron's understanding of defensive air combat. "Before we begin the detailed analysis," Johnson announced, his voice carrying the formal tone reserved for significant training events, "I want to emphasize that what we witnessed today challenges some fundamental assumptions about air combat effectiveness and pilot capability." The engagement lasted 14 minutes and 37 seconds, during which Lightning executed 6 separate attack sequences, all technically proficient and tactically sound according to established doctrine. He paused, consulting his tablet before continuing. Sparrow successfully defeated every attack without employing standard defensive countermeasures and without significantly degrading her aircraft's energy state. The first video segment showed the engagement from Rodriguez's perspective, his head-up display revealing the systematic development of what should have been a routine kill against an overmatched opponent. The footage demonstrated textbook perfect execution of offensive tactics, with Rodriguez achieving optimal firing positions and employment parameters that met every criterion for successful weapons engagement. His aircraft handling was flawless. His tactical decision-making reflected years of training and experience, and his approach to the engagement followed precisely the aggressive philosophy that had made him one of the squadron's most successful pilots. Lightning's first attack sequence was executed perfectly. Johnson continued, highlighting specific portions of the video that showed Rodriguez's systematic approach to achieving a firing solution. Radar lock was established at optimal range. Simulated missile employment occurred within acceptable parameters, and the target aircraft appeared to be in an indefensible position. The analysis confirmed what everyone in the room already knew. Rodriguez had done everything right according to every tactical manual ever written about air-to-air combat. The perspective shifted to Sarah's aircraft, and the room fell silent as pilots witnessed her response to Rodriguez's opening attack. Instead of the frantic defensive maneuvering they expected to see, the footage revealed a series of subtle adjustments to airspeed, altitude, and aircraft attitude that appeared almost casual compared to the life-or-death struggle they had imagined. Her movements seemed choreographed, as if she had anticipated not just the attack itself, but the specific parameters and timing that would govern the simulated missile's flight profile and terminal guidance characteristics. Sparrow's defensive response incorporated energy management principles that aren't taught in any current Air Force curriculum. Johnson explained, using laser pointer to highlight specific aspects of Sarah's maneuvering. She exploited fundamental limitations in missile guidance technology through precise manipulation of closure rates, aspect angles, and relative motion that degraded the weapon's ability to maintain track and achieve intercept. The technical explanation was accurate, but failed to capture the almost supernatural precision with which Sarah had executed maneuvers that required split-second timing and intimate knowledge of weapons system capabilities. Captain Vasquez raised her hand with obvious confusion. "Sir, where did she learn those techniques? That's not standard defensive doctrine, and it's definitely not something they teach in pilot training or weapons school." Her question reflected the growing bewilderment among squadron members, who were struggling to reconcile their assessment of Sarah's capabilities with the evidence being presented on the tactical display. The disconnect between expectation and reality was forcing a fundamental reevaluation of assumptions that had seemed unshakable just hours earlier. "That's an excellent question, Phoenix," Johnson replied, "and one that we'll be exploring in greater detail during individual debriefs with both pilots." His diplomatic response avoided speculation while acknowledging that Sarah's tactical knowledge appeared to extend far beyond anything documented in her training records or previous performance evaluations. The implication that she possessed advanced capabilities that had somehow remained hidden during months of routine training exercises was both intriguing and professionally concerning to squadron leadership. The video analysis continued through each of Rodriguez's subsequent attack attempts, revealing a pattern of systematic exploitation of weaknesses in offensive tactics that no one in the room had previously recognized as vulnerabilities. Sarah's responses demonstrated not just defensive competence, but an understanding of air combat physics that bordered on the academic, as if she had studied every aspect of missile guidance technology and aircraft performance with the thoroughness of an engineer rather than simply a pilot. Her movements were economical, precise, and devastatingly effective. "The most remarkable aspect of Sparrow's performance," Johnson continued, "was her ability to maintain defensive superiority without depleting her aircraft's energy state. At the conclusion of the engagement, her fuel remaining and airspeed were actually superior to Lightning's, despite having been on the defensive throughout the entire exercise." This observation drew murmurs of disbelief from pilots, who understood that defensive maneuvering typically required energy expenditure that left the defending aircraft at a cumulative disadvantage. Rodriguez finally spoke, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Sir, I followed established attack protocols throughout the engagement. Every maneuver was by the book. Every weapons employment met doctrinal standards, and my aircraft performance was optimal." His statement wasn't defensive but genuinely confused, reflecting a pilot trying to understand how perfect execution of proven tactics had resulted in complete failure against an opponent he had expected to defeat easily. The experience had clearly shaken his confidence in fundamental principles he had never questioned. Major Morrison stepped forward to address the elephant in the room that everyone was thinking about, but no one had explicitly mentioned. What we witnessed today suggests that current tactical doctrine may have significant gaps when employed against opponents who understand our standard operating procedures well enough to exploit their inherent limitations. His observation was diplomatically phrased, but carried profound implications for how the squadron understood their own capabilities and vulnerabilities. Sarah raised her hand for the first time during the debrief, her voice calm and professional. When Johnson acknowledged her, "Sir, may I ask about the parameters for tomorrow's exercise? Will we be facing different opponents or employing different engagement rules?" Her question seemed routine, but demonstrated that she was already thinking ahead to the next phase of training, rather than dwelling on her unexpected success. The lack of gloating or self-congratulation was notable in a profession where ego and bravado were typically considered essential characteristics. Tomorrow's exercises will involve multiple aircraft and more complex scenarios, Johnson replied, studying Sarah with obvious curiosity. You'll be facing opponents from the aggressor. Squadron flying F-5 aircraft configured to simulate foreign fighter capabilities. The engagement rules will include beyond visual range combat and electronic warfare elements. His explanation was standard but carried additional weight given the day's unexpected results and the questions they had raised about squadron capabilities. Debrief continued for another 30 minutes, with detailed analysis of every aspect of the engagement, revealing layers of tactical sophistication that challenged conventional understanding of air combat effectiveness. Sarah's performance had been more than simply successful. It had been educational in ways that forced experienced pilots to reconsider fundamental assumptions about defensive capabilities and tactical innovation. The implications extended beyond individual pilot performance to questions about training doctrine and operational readiness that would require careful consideration by squadron leadership. That as the formal debrief concluded and pilots began filing out of the ready room, small groups formed to discuss what they had witnessed and attempt to process its implications for their own understanding of aerial combat. The conversations were subdued, lacking the usual post-flight banter and competitive analysis that typically characterize squadron interactions. Everyone understood that something significant had occurred, though few could articulate exactly what it meant for their profession or their personal approach to flying. Rodriguez approached Sarah as she was packing her notebook, his expression mixing professional respect with genuine curiosity. "I'd like to understand what you did out there," he said quietly, ensuring their conversation remained private. "That wasn't luck and it wasn't standard defensive doctrine. You knew exactly what I was going to do before I did it." His acknowledgement represented a significant shift from his earlier dismissive attitude, reflecting newfound respect for capabilities he had never imagined possible. Sarah looked up from her notes, meeting Rodriguez's eyes directly for the first time since her arrival at Thunderbolt. "My grandfather used to say that understanding your enemy's strengths is important, but understanding his weaknesses is victory," she replied simply. "Modern air combat doctrine is very effective, but it's also predictable if you know what to look for." Her explanation was characteristically understated, but hinted at knowledge and preparation that went far beyond anything her squadron mates had suspected she possessed. The aggressor squadron's F-5 aircraft sat on the flight line like mechanical predators, their camouflage paint schemes and foreign-style markings designed to simulate the threat aircraft that American pilots might face in actual combat scenarios around the world. These aging but nimble fighters had been specifically modified to replicate the performance, characteristics and tactical capabilities of Russian, Chinese, and other adversary aircraft, making them ideal training platforms for testing pilot skills against unfamiliar threats. The sight of these distinctly non-American, Looking aircraft always created an additional psychological element to training exercises, forcing pilots to confront the reality that future conflicts would involve opponents flying different equipment. With different tactical philosophies, Major Elena Vixen Kowalski commanded the 64th Aggressor Squadron with the kind of focused intensity that came from spending 15 years perfecting the art of replicating enemy tactics and procedures. Her Polish American heritage and fluency in multiple languages had made her particularly effective at understanding and implementing foreign fighter tactics, earning her a reputation as one of the most challenging opponents in the Air Forces. Training establishment. When briefed about the previous day's unexpected results involving Lieutenant Chen, Kowalski had requested specific authorization to participate personally in the day's exercises rather than simply overseeing her younger pilots. Today we find out if yesterday was a fluke or if Sparrow actually knows something the rest of us don't, Major Morrison announced during the morning briefing, his tone carefully neutral despite the obvious curiosity burning behind his professional demeanor. The entire squadron had spent the previous evening analyzing video footage and telemetry data from Sarah's engagement with Rodriguez, searching for clues that might explain her seemingly impossible defensive performance. Their analysis had raised more questions than answers, leading to a collective determination to subject her to increasingly challenging scenarios. The morning's exercise would pit Sarah against 2 F-5 aircraft simultaneously, a significant escalation in complexity that would test her ability to manage multiple threats while maintaining the defensive superiority she had demonstrated against Rodriguez. The aggressor pilots, Captain Marcus Fang Williams and Lieutenant Rebecca Razor Kim, were both veterans of multiple red flag exercises and possessed intimate knowledge of how to exploit the numerical advantage their 2 versus 1 scenario would provide. Their tactics would be based on actual foreign fighter doctrine rather than American procedures, adding an element of unpredictability to the engagement. Sarah's pre-flight preparation routine remained unchanged despite the increased stakes and complexity of her assigned mission. She conducted the same methodical inspection of aircraft 257, reviewed the same worn notebook filled with handwritten observations, and maintained the same calm professionalism that had characterized her approach to flying since arriving at Thunderbolt. The maintenance crew had worked overtime to address the radar intermittency issues that had plagued her aircraft, though Staff Sergeant Torres warned that the older systems might still experience degraded performance under the stress of intensive maneuvering against multiple opponents. The tactical briefing revealed engagement parameters designed to challenge every aspect of Sarah's flying ability and tactical knowledge. The exercise would begin with a simulated beyond visual range phase, where radar-guided missiles could be employed at maximum distance before transitioning to close range maneuvering combat that would test aircraft handling skills and situational awareness. Electronic warfare elements would include radar jamming and communication interference designed to replicate the degraded information environment of actual combat operations. Captain Williams had built his reputation on aggressive tactics that overwhelmed opponents through relentless pressure and coordinated attacks that left little room for defensive maneuvering. His partnership with Lieutenant Kim was particularly effective because their complementary flying styles allowed them to maintain constant offensive pressure while minimizing the windows of opportunity available to defending aircraft. Their success rate against individual opponents was nearly perfect, making them ideal candidates for testing whether Sarah's previous performance had been an anomaly or evidence of genuine tactical capability. The key to fighting outnumbered, Major Kowalski explained to her pilots during their private briefing, is to exploit the coordination requirements that multiple attackers impose on each other. If Sparrow really understands defensive tactics at the level suggested by yesterday's performance, she'll attempt to force us into interference patterns that limit our ability to employ weapons effectively. Her analysis was based on decades of experience studying air combat dynamics, though she remained skeptical that any single pilot could consistently defeat coordinated attacks by experienced opponents. The weapons loadout for all aircraft included simulated AIM-120, MRAM missiles for beyond visual range combat, and AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles for close-range engagements, creating multiple layers of threat that would require different defensive techniques and tactical responses. Sarah's older F-16 carried the same weapons as her opponents, but the performance limitations of her aircraft's radar and electronic warfare systems would place her at a significant disadvantage during the initial phases of combat. The scenario was designed to test her ability to overcome technological inferiority through superior tactics and pilot skill. The flight to the training area proceeded without incident, though radio communications between the aggressor aircraft revealed their confidence in achieving a quick victory against an opponent they viewed as overrated based on a single lucky engagement. Their tactical discussion focused on coordination techniques and attack timing rather than defensive considerations, reflecting their assumption that maintaining offensive pressure would prevent Sarah from implementing whatever unconventional tactics she had employed against Rodriguez. Wizard, this is Fang Flight, 2 ships, established in the area and ready for the exercise. Captain Williams transmitted as his formation reached the engagement zone at the prescribed altitude and configuration. His F-5 aircraft had been optimized for the day's mission with enhanced radar warning receivers and electronic countermeasures that would allow him to detect and respond to Sarah's defensive actions more effectively than Rodriguez had been able to accomplish with his standard F-16 configuration. Sarah's response came several minutes later as her aircraft completed its climb to the engagement altitude, the delay reflecting the performance limitations of her older engine and the tactical disadvantage she would face throughout the exercise. Sparrow was established and ready. She transmitted with the same calm professionalism that had become her trademark, showing no indication of concern about facing 2 opponents simultaneously for the first time in her career. Her aircraft systems were functioning normally despite the maintenance concerns, though the radar display showed the intermittent glitches that had become a familiar characteristic of her aging equipment. The engagement began with Williams and Kim implementing a classic pincer movement designed to force Sarah into a position where she would face simultaneous attacks from different vectors, making effective defensive maneuvering nearly impossible. Their coordination was flawless, with precise timing and communication that demonstrated hundreds of hours of training together as an effective fighting team. The maneuver should have resulted in at least 1 successful missile engagement within the first 2 minutes of combat, establishing the pattern of offensive dominance that would characterize the remainder of the exercise. Sarah's initial response appeared to follow the same unconventional defensive principles she had demonstrated against Rodriguez, but the presence of multiple attackers introduced complications that seemed to require entirely new tactical approaches. Her aircraft maneuvered with the same precise energy management that had proven so effective previously, but now she had to account for threats from multiple directions while maintaining awareness of her fuel state and weapons employment opportunities. The mathematical complexity of managing multiple simultaneous threats should have overwhelmed any pilot's ability to calculate optimal responses. The first simulated missile launch came from Lieutenant Kim, whose F-5 had achieved what appeared to be an ideal firing position despite Sarah's defensive maneuvering. The shot met all technical parameters for a successful engagement, with proper radar lock, acceptable range, and target geometry that should have guaranteed impact. Williams had positioned his aircraft to deny Sarah escape routes, creating a tactical situation that air combat theory suggested was unsurvivable for the defending pilot. Sarah's defensive response once again defied conventional expectations, but this time her maneuvers incorporated elements that seemed to account for the presence of multiple attackers in ways that no standard doctrine addressed. Her aircraft's flight path created what appeared to be a 3-dimensional puzzle, that forced both attacking aircraft to modify their own positions to avoid mutual interference while maintaining their individual attacks. The defensive technique was so sophisticated that observing controllers struggled to understand how any pilot could calculate the required timing and positioning in real time. Negative impact, Razor shot is evaluated as a miss, announced the AWACS controller, confirming that Sarah had once again successfully defeated a textbook perfect attack through methods that challenged fundamental assumptions about air combat physics. The announcement was met with radio silence from the aggressor aircraft, whose pilots were beginning to experience the same confusion and frustration that had affected Rodriguez during the previous day's engagement. Captain Williams immediately implemented his secondary attack plan, attempting to exploit what he assumed must be Sarah's temporary tactical advantage through more aggressive maneuvering that would deny her time to prepare additional defensive sequences. His approach was sound according to every manual ever written about air combat tactics, yet Sarah's aircraft seemed to anticipate his movements with the same uncanny precision she had demonstrated against his wingman's initial attack. The engagement was developing into an extended maneuvering contest that favored neither side clearly, an outcome that neither aggressor pilot had considered possible when facing a single opponent. The exercise continued for 12 more minutes, with Sarah successfully defeating every coordinated attempt through defensive techniques that appeared to violate the basic mathematics of aerial combat. Her performance was even more impressive than her previous day's success, because managing multiple threats simultaneously required exponentially greater tactical sophistication and situational awareness than defeating a single opponent. By the time Williams finally called for termination of the exercise, both aggressor pilots had exhausted their tactical options without achieving a single successful engagement. The return flight to Thunderbolt was conducted in unusual silence, with none of the typical post-exercise radio banter that characterized training missions. Both aggressor pilots were struggling to process their failure against an opponent who had somehow neutralized every advantage their numerical superiority and coordinated tactics should have provided. Their confusion was evident in their subdued communications with air traffic control and their reluctance to engage in the usual analysis of tactical lessons learned during the flight back to base. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The Officers Club at Thunderbolt Air Force Base, typically buzzed with the confident conversations of elite pilots sharing war stories, technical discussions, and the competitive banter that defines squadron culture. Tonight, however, an unusual quiet had settled over the familiar gathering place as word spread about Sarah's second consecutive impossible victory. Pilots who had spent years perfecting their understanding of air combat dynamics now found themselves questioning fundamental principles they had never thought to examine. The leather chairs and dimly lit atmosphere that usually provided comfort for post-flight discussions instead seemed to amplify the uncomfortable uncertainty that had infected the squadron's collective confidence. Staff Sergeant Martinez from the maintenance division approached Sarah's table carrying 2 bottles of beer, her expression mixing professional respect with genuine curiosity about the pilot who had become the base's most discussed topic in just 48 hours. Martinez had worked on fighter aircraft for 12 years and prided herself on understanding the relationship between pilot capability and aircraft performance, making Sarah's achievements with the aging F-16 particularly intriguing from a technical perspective. Her decision to join Sarah rather than participating in the larger group discussions represented a significant departure from normal social protocols. "Mind if I sit?" Martinez asked, gesturing toward the empty chair across from Sarah's table, in a corner of the club that provided relative privacy from the ongoing conversations about the day's unexpected training results. Her approach was respectful but direct, reflecting the straightforward communication style common among maintenance Personnel who dealt with technical realities rather than the tactical abstractions that occupied pilots' attention. Sarah nodded silently, closing the notebook she had been reviewing and accepting the offered beer, with a slight smile that represented more emotion than most squadron members had ever seen her display. "I've been working on your aircraft since you arrived," Martinez began, settling into her chair and studying Sarah with the analytical gaze of someone accustomed to diagnosing complex mechanical problems. "Aircraft 257 has issues that would frustrate most pilots into requesting transfers to different machines, yet you've been achieving performance levels that shouldn't be possible with that equipment." Her observation was stated as fact rather than accusation, reflecting genuine professional curiosity about how pilot skill could compensate for technological limitations. Sarah took a measured sip of her beer before responding, her eyes meeting Martinez's directly for one of the few times since arriving at Thunderbolt. "My grandfather taught me that understanding your tools completely is more important than having perfect tools," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of memory and long-held conviction. "Every aircraft has characteristics that can be exploited if you know them well enough. Most pilots fight against their equipment's limitations instead of learning to work within them." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of Major Morrison, whose presence immediately altered the dynamics of their discussion as both women straightened to acknowledge his authority. Morrison carried his own beer and wore the casual civilian clothes that replaced his uniform during off-duty hours, but his commanding presence remained unmistakable. His expression mixed professional curiosity with the frustrated confusion that had characterized his attitude toward Sarah since her first unexpected victory over Rodriguez. "Lieutenant Chen," Morrison said formally, despite the informal setting, "I've been reviewing the tactical analysis from both of your recent engagements, and I'm struggling to understand how you've developed capabilities that don't appear in any current training curriculum." His tone was carefully neutral, avoiding either accusation or praise while seeking information that might explain phenomena that challenged his understanding of air combat effectiveness. The direct approach reflected his growing frustration with mysteries that defied conventional military analysis. Sarah considered her response carefully, aware that her answer might determine her future at Thunderbolt and influence how the squadron leadership viewed her continued participation in the advanced training program. "Sir, my tactical knowledge comes from sources beyond standard Air Force instruction," she replied diplomatically, choosing her words with the precision of someone who understood the sensitive nature of classified information and personal privacy. "I've had access to historical combat analysis and alternative tactical philosophies that aren't typically included in formal pilot education." Martinez leaned forward with obvious interest, her mechanical engineering background making her particularly curious about unconventional approaches to technical problems. "What kind of historical analysis?" she asked, her question reflecting the practical mindset of someone who sought specific information rather than vague explanations. "Are we talking about foreign tactics, experimental procedures, or something else entirely?" Her directness was characteristic of maintenance personnel who required precise information to perform their duties effectively. Before Sarah could respond, the conversation was joined by Captain Vasquez, whose approach had been deliberately casual but whose presence clearly represented more than social interest. Vasquez carried herself with the controlled confidence of a combat veteran who had fought for every ounce of respect in a male-dominated profession, making her assessment of Sarah's capabilities particularly significant to squadron dynamics. Her evaluation would carry weight with other pilots who respected her judgment and operational experience. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Vasquez said, settling into an empty chair without waiting for permission, "but I wanted to discuss what happened out there today. I've been flying fighters for 8 years, including 2 combat deployments, and I've never seen defensive techniques like what you demonstrated against the aggressor squadron." Her tone carried professional respect rather than the dismissive skepticism that had characterized earlier interactions, reflecting a significant shift in her assessment of Sarah's capabilities. Sarah nodded acknowledgement of Vasquez's presence, while maintaining the careful diplomatic balance she had established in response to Morrison's inquiry. Every pilot develops personal techniques based on their training, experience, and individual approach to problem-solving, she replied, offering a general explanation that avoided specific details while acknowledging the legitimate curiosity her performance had generated. My background includes exposure to tactical concepts that aren't necessarily part of standard curriculum. Morrison set his beer down and leaned forward, his expression indicating that diplomatic generalities were no longer sufficient to address the questions Sarah's performance had raised. Lieutenant, your personal techniques have defeated 4 of our most capable pilots in scenarios designed to test advanced tactical skills, he said firmly, but not aggressively. That level of effectiveness suggests training or knowledge that goes beyond individual innovation. I need to understand what we're dealing with here. The directness of Morrison's inquiry created a moment of tense silence as Sarah considered how much information she could share without violating security protocols or personal privacy boundaries that she had maintained since arriving at Thunderbolt. Her hesitation was barely perceptible, but Martinez noticed the slight tension that suggested internal conflict between competing obligations and desires. The maintenance sergeant's experience with classified programs made her sensitive to the subtle indicators that suggested restricted information. My father was Colonel David Chen, Callsign Ghost, Sarah finally said, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and carefully controlled emotion. He flew F-4 Phantoms during the final phases of the Vietnam War and later served as a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base, where he participated in the development of advanced air combat tactics that remained classified for 20 years after his death. The revelation provided context for her unusual capabilities while explaining why her tactical knowledge might extend beyond standard training curricula. Morrison's expression shifted immediately as recognition dawned. His knowledge of Air Force history allowing him to place the significance of Sarah's lineage within the context of her demonstrated capabilities. Colonel Chun was part of the Advanced Fighter Tactics program, he said quietly, his tone reflecting newfound respect for both Sarah's heritage and the source of her tactical education. That project developed many of the defensive concepts that eventually became standard doctrine, though some elements remained classified due to their sensitivity. Vasquez exchanged glances with Martinez, both women recognizing that they were witnessing the revelation of information that explained mysteries that had puzzled the entire squadron. The Advanced Fighter Tactics program had been legendary among pilots who studied Air Force history, though specific details remained restricted even decades after its conclusion. Sarah's access to that legacy through her father's involvement provided a logical explanation for capabilities that had seemed impossible to achieve through conventional training. He taught me using methods that weren't officially documented, Sarah continued, her voice becoming stronger as she shared information that she had kept private since beginning her military career. The techniques he developed were based on mathematical analysis of air combat dynamics rather than traditional tactical doctrine. He believed that understanding the physics of aerial engagement was more important than memorizing standard procedures. Her explanation revealed the scientific foundation underlying her seemingly supernatural tactical abilities. The conversation continued for another hour as Sarah gradually shared elements of her unconventional education that had remained hidden. Throughout her military career, her father's approach to air combat had emphasized mathematical precision over aggressive instinct, patient analysis over immediate action, and systematic exploitation of opponent weaknesses rather than reliance on superior technology or raw skill. The philosophy had shaped her entire approach to flying, creating capabilities that appeared magical to observers who understood only conventional tactical thinking. As the evening progressed and Sarah's story emerged through careful revelation, the attitudes of her squadron mates underwent a fundamental transformation. What had seemed like impossible luck or unexplainable talent now revealed itself as the product of unique education and systematic preparation that exceeded anything available through standard military training. Her quiet confidence, methodical approach, and unconventional tactical choices suddenly made sense within the context of an alternative philosophy of air combat that few pilots had ever encountered. The revelation of Sarah's background marked a turning point in her relationship with the squadron, transforming her from an inexplicable anomaly into a valuable resource whose knowledge might benefit everyone's tactical education. The dismissive mockery that had characterized initial reactions to her Callsign and apparent limitations now seemed embarrassingly misguided, replaced by genuine curiosity about what other insights she might possess. Her transformation from squadron outsider to tactical innovator was complete, though the most challenging phases of her training remained ahead. The morning briefing for Phase 2 of the advanced training program carried an electric tension that hadn't existed during previous weeks, as squadron members filed into the ready room with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy that reflected their dramatically altered perceptions of their quiet colleague. Sarah entered at her usual time, carrying the same worn notebook and maintaining the same professional demeanor, but now every pilot in the room watched her movements with the kind of focused attention typically reserved for legendary figures whose capabilities had achieved mythical status within military culture. Major Morrison stood before a tactical display showing a complex electronic warfare scenario that would test pilot capabilities under conditions designed to replicate the most challenging aspects of modern air combat. The screen depicted multiple threat systems, radar jamming patterns, and communication disruption zones that would force pilots to operate with severely degraded information while facing opponents whose electronic warfare capabilities matched or exceeded their own. This phase of training had historically eliminated more pilots from the program than any other challenge, earning a reputation as the definitive test of adaptability and tactical innovation. Phase 2 introduces electronic warfare elements that will fundamentally alter how you approach air combat, Morrison announced, his voice carrying the serious tone reserved for training that had proven lethal in actual combat operations. Your advanced avionics systems will be jammed, your radar will be unreliable, your communications will be intermittent, and your navigation systems will provide false information designed to confuse and disorient you. He paused, scanning the assembled pilots with the expression of someone who had witnessed too many promising careers end during similar exercises. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson stepped forward to explain the specific technical challenges that would govern the day's exercises, his briefing incorporating lessons learned from recent conflicts, where electronic warfare had proven decisive in determining combat outcomes. Modern adversaries possess sophisticated jamming capabilities that can neutralize most of the technological advantages we've grown accustomed to relying upon, he explained, highlighting specific threat systems on the tactical display. Success in this environment requires pilots who can fight effectively when their aircraft's electronic systems have been compromised or completely disabled. The scenario would pit Sarah against Captain Rodriguez in a rematch of their initial engagement, but this time both aircraft would operate under severe electronic warfare conditions that would eliminate most of their advanced capabilities and force them to rely on backup instruments, visual identification, and tactical skills that didn't depend on technological superiority. The engagement parameters were designed to level the playing field by removing the equipment advantages that typically influenced combat outcomes, creating conditions where pilot skill and tactical knowledge would prove decisive. Rodriguez had spent the previous 3 days analyzing video footage and telemetry data from his initial defeat, working with the squadron's tactics officers to identify weaknesses in Sarah's defensive approach that might be exploited during their second encounter. His preparation had been methodical and professional, reflecting the focused determination of a skilled pilot seeking to restore his reputation through improved performance. The electronic warfare environment would force both pilots to adapt their tactics in real time, creating opportunities for innovative approaches that might neutralize Sarah's previous advantages. Sarah's preparation routine remained unchanged despite the increased complexity of the scenario, though observers noted that she spent additional time reviewing sections of her grandfather's notebook that contained handwritten observations about flying with degraded instruments and limited electronic support. Her methodical approach to studying backup systems and manual navigation techniques reflected training that predated the electronic warfare environment by several decades, potentially providing advantages that her opponent might not possess despite his superior recent experience. The pre-flight briefing revealed electronic warfare parameters that would test every aspect of pilot adaptability and technical knowledge. Primary radar systems would experience intermittent jamming that would create false contacts and mask actual targets, requiring pilots to distinguish between genuine threats and electronic deceptions through visual confirmation and tactical analysis. Communication systems would suffer periodic blackouts that would force pilots to operate independently without the coordination support that modern air combat typically required for success. Aircraft 257 had received special modifications designed to test Sarah's ability to overcome technological limitations through pilot skill and tactical innovation. The aging F-16's already problematic radar system would be subjected to additional jamming that would render it virtually useless for beyond visual range combat, forcing her to rely on visual identification and close range maneuvering skills that few modern pilots had developed to expert levels. The handicap was intended to create the ultimate test of whether pilot capability could overcome technological disadvantage. Rodriguez's aircraft received similar electronic warfare degradation, though his newer F-16 possessed backup systems and redundant capabilities that would provide marginal advantages during extended periods of jamming. His tactical plan relied on exploiting these small technological edges while implementing lessons learned from analyzing Sarah's previous defensive techniques. The approach was sound according to conventional wisdom, though it remained to be seen whether conventional approaches would prove effective against unconventional opposition. The flight to the training area proceeded under simulated combat conditions, with both aircraft experiencing intermittent communication failures and navigation system malfunctions that forced pilots to rely on visual landmarks and dead reckoning techniques for basic flight operations. The psychological pressure of operating with degraded systems was immediately apparent, as both pilots had to divide their attention between basic aircraft control and preparation for the upcoming combat engagement. "This is Wizard. Your exercise environment is now hot with electronic warfare active," announced the AWACS controller, his transmission partially obscured by static and interference that demonstrated the realistic nature of the jamming simulation. "Primary radar contacts are unreliable, communications will be intermittent, and navigation systems are compromised. Weapons are authorized when positive visual identification is achieved." The formal commencement of hostilities occurred under conditions that challenged every assumption about modern air combat effectiveness. Sarah's response to the electronic warfare environment revealed capabilities that her squadron mates had not previously witnessed, as she transitioned seamlessly to backup instruments and manual flight control techniques that appeared almost instinctive. Her aircraft handling remained smooth and controlled, despite the loss of automated systems that most pilots relied upon for basic flight operations, suggesting training or experience that extended beyond standard pilot education. The ease with which she adapted to degraded conditions was particularly notable given her aircraft's already problematic electronic systems. Rodriguez attempted to exploit his slight technological advantages by implementing Aggressive tactics designed to force. Close-range maneuvering where electronic warfare would have minimal impact on weapons employment and target acquisition. His approach was tactically sound and reflected careful analysis of the engagement parameters, though it required him to operate his aircraft at performance levels that left little margin for error or unexpected defensive responses from his opponent. The initial contact between the two aircraft occurred under visual conditions that eliminated the beyond visual range advantages typically associated with modern air combat, creating a scenario that more closely resembled historical dogfighting than contemporary tactical engagements. Both pilots had to rely on visual identification, flight path analysis, and energy management techniques that tested fundamental flying skills rather than electronic systems operation and radar interpretation capabilities. Sarah's defensive response to Rodriguez's opening attack incorporated elements that seemed specifically designed to exploit the electronic warfare environment rather than simply cope with its limitations. Her maneuvers created geometric relationships that confused her opponent's targeting systems, while positioning her aircraft to take advantage of radar shadows and jamming effects that degraded his ability to maintain situational awareness. Tactical approach suggested intimate familiarity with electronic warfare principles that went beyond basic defensive doctrine. The engagement developed into an extended maneuvering contest that showcased both pilots' technical flying skills while testing their ability to adapt tactical decisions to constantly changing electronic conditions. Rodriguez's attacks were professionally executed and tactically sound, but Sarah's defensive responses demonstrated the same uncanny anticipation and precise timing that had characterized her previous victories. The electronic warfare environment seemed to favor her methodical approach over his aggressive tactics, though the reasons for this advantage weren't immediately apparent to observing controllers. Sparrow Lightning, be advised your communications are degraded, transmitted the AWACS controller during a brief break in the jamming cycle. Continue the engagement under visual flight rules with weapons tight until positive identification. The reminder emphasized the challenging conditions under which both pilots were operating, though Sarah's response suggested she was less affected by the restrictions than her opponent appeared to be. The conclusion of the engagement came after 18 minutes of intensive maneuvering that pushed both aircraft and pilots to their operational limits. Rodriguez had achieved several promising attack positions, but had been unable to complete successful weapons employment due to electronic interference and Sarah's defensive countermeasures. His final fuel state and aircraft condition reflected the cumulative stress of extended combat maneuvering under degraded conditions, while Sarah's aircraft maintained better energy management despite operating with inferior equipment. When both pilots returned to Thunderbolt for the mandatory debrief, the preliminary analysis suggested that Sarah had once again achieved victory through methods that defied conventional tactical understanding. Her performance under electronic warfare conditions had been even more impressive than her previous successes, demonstrating adaptability and technical knowledge that exceeded anything documented in her training records. The implications for Phase 3 of the advanced program were becoming increasingly significant as squadron leadership recognized they were witnessing capabilities that might revolutionize their understanding of pilot effectiveness. The Pentagon's Advanced Air Combat Assessment Board convened in a secure conference room overlooking the Potomac River, its members representing the highest levels of Air Force tactical expertise and strategic planning authority. General Patricia Hawkins, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, presided over the emergency session that had been called specifically to address the unexpected results emerging from Thunderbolt Air Force Base's advanced training program. The classified briefing materials spread across the polished conference table contained video footage, telemetry data, and tactical analyses that challenged fundamental assumptions about pilot capabilities and combat effectiveness. Colonel Marcus Sterling, Director of Fighter Pilot Training, stood before a large projection screen, displaying statistical comparisons that seemed almost impossible to reconcile with established performance metrics. In 6 consecutive engagements over 2 weeks, Lieutenant Chen has achieved perfect offensive success against opponents whose combined experience totals over 40 years of fighter operations, he reported, his voice carrying the bewildered tone of a professional trying to explain phenomena that defied conventional analysis. Her performance parameters exceed theoretical maximums, established through decades of pilot evaluation and combat data analysis. The assembled officers included some of the Air Force's most distinguished combat veterans, test pilots, and tactical theorists, yet none possessed adequate explanations for the capabilities being demonstrated by a previously unremarkable pilot at a routine training facility. General Hawkins studied the projection screen with the focused intensity of someone whose strategic responsibilities required understanding threats and opportunities that might reshape military aviation. Her questions would determine whether Sarah's achievements represented isolated anomalies or evidence of revolutionary tactical possibilities. What's her background beyond the standard personnel file information? Asked Brigadier General Robert Chen, no relation to Sarah despite sharing her surname, whose extensive experience with classified programs made him particularly sensitive to capabilities that might have unconventional origins. His inquiry reflected growing suspicions that Sarah's tactical knowledge derived from sources beyond documented training records, possibly including exposure to experimental programs or foreign tactical doctrine that hadn't been previously identified. Colonel Sterling consulted his classified briefing materials before responding with information that had required special security clearances to obtain and verify. Her father was Colonel David Chun, who participated in several black programs during the 1980s, including the Advanced Fighter Tactics Development Project. He explained, highlighting connections that provided context for capabilities that had seemed inexplicable through conventional analysis. Those programs developed theoretical approaches to air combat that were never fully implemented due to classification restrictions and technological limitations. The revelation transformed the tenor of the briefing as senior officers recognized the significance of lineage that connected Sarah to some of the Air Force's most innovative and secretive tactical development programs. General Hawkins leaned forward with obvious interest, her strategic perspective allowing her to appreciate implications that extended beyond individual pilot performance to questions of institutional knowledge and tactical evolution. The information suggested that Sarah's capabilities might represent preservation of experimental concepts that the official Air Force had abandoned decades earlier. Do we have access to her father's research materials? General Hawkins inquired, her question reflecting recognition that understanding Sarah's tactical foundation might provide insights valuable to broader Air Force operations. If his theoretical work has practical applications that we haven't fully explored, there could be implications for pilot training, tactical doctrine, and operational planning that extend far beyond individual performance assessment. Her strategic thinking was already connecting Sarah's achievements to potential force multiplication opportunities. Meanwhile, at Thunderbolt Air Force Base, Sarah's continued success had generated an atmosphere of intense anticipation as the squadron prepared for Phase 3 of the advanced training program. The final phase would involve large force exercises incorporating multiple squadrons, complex mission objectives, and realistic threat scenarios that would test every aspect of pilot capability and tactical knowledge. Success in this phase typically determined selection for the most prestigious assignments in the Air Force. While failure could end promising careers and limit future opportunities, Major Morrison had spent sleepless nights reviewing tactical doctrine and historical combat analyses, searching for precedents that might explain or predict Sarah's performance in scenarios involving multiple aircraft and complex coordination requirements. His professional reputation depended on understanding the capabilities of pilots under his command. Yet Sarah's achievements continued to defy analysis through conventional frameworks. The upcoming exercises would either validate her tactical innovations or reveal limitations that had been masked by the relatively simple scenarios she had faced previously. The large force exercise scenario involved a simulated strike mission against heavily defended targets, with Sarah assigned to a four-ship formation tasked with providing fighter escort through multiple layers of simulated surface-to-air threats and aggressive enemy fighter patrols. The mission parameters required coordination with AWACS controllers, tanker aircraft, and ground-based command elements while maintaining formation integrity and achieving tactical objectives under intense opposition. Failure in any aspect of the mission would result in simulated casualties and mission failure that would reflect poorly on all participants. Captain Rodriguez had been assigned as Sarah's flight lead for the exercise, a decision that reflected both his seniority and Morrison's desire to observe how their previous encounters might influence their ability to work together effectively. Rodriguez's attitude toward Sarah had evolved considerably since their initial engagement, transforming from dismissive condescension to respectful curiosity about tactical methods that had proven consistently effective against conventional approaches. Their partnership would test whether Sarah's individual capabilities could translate into effective teamwork. The mission briefing revealed threat scenarios based on actual intelligence assessments of advanced foreign air defense systems, creating realistic challenges that would test pilot skills against opponents whose capabilities matched or exceeded current American standards. Sarah studied the threat analyses with her characteristic methodical attention, taking detailed notes about engagement envelopes, radar frequencies, and tactical countermeasures that would influence mission planning and execution. Her preparation suggested familiarity with threat systems that exceeded standard pilot education. Aircraft 257 had been upgraded with enhanced electronic warfare systems, specifically for the large force exercise, though the improvements were minimal compared to the advanced capabilities available to newer aircraft in the formation. Sarah accepted the technological limitations without complaint, instead focusing her preparation on coordination procedures and communication protocols that would allow her to contribute effectively despite equipment disadvantages. Her approach reflected the adaptive philosophy that had characterized her success throughout the training program. The pre-mission briefing lasted 3 hours as squadron leaders outlined coordination procedures, threat assessments, and emergency protocols that would govern the complex operation. Sarah participated actively in tactical discussions for the first time since arriving at Thunderbolt, offering insights about defensive countermeasures and threat exploitation that demonstrated knowledge extending far beyond her documented training background. Her contributions were received with respectful attention rather than the skepticism that had characterized earlier interactions. The surface-to-air threat systems we'll be facing employ overlapping engagement envelopes designed to eliminate traditional penetration corridors, explained the mission commander during his threat briefing. Success will require innovative approaches to route planning, electronic warfare employment, and coordinated defensive tactics that exploit weaknesses in their integrated air defense networks. His analysis emphasized the sophisticated nature of the opposition they would encounter during the exercise. Sarah raised her hand during the planning session, her question reflecting tactical thinking that hadn't been addressed in the standard briefing materials. Sir, have we considered exploiting the coordination delays inherent in network defense systems? She asked, her inquiry suggesting knowledge of vulnerabilities that weren't typically discussed in conventional tactical education. Simultaneous attacks on multiple nodes might create windows of opportunity that individual aircraft couldn't exploit alone. The mission commander paused, studying Sarah with obvious interest as he considered implications of her question that hadn't been included in his prepared briefing materials. That's an advanced concept that requires precise timing and coordination," he replied, his tone reflecting growing recognition that her tactical knowledge extended beyond standard pilot capabilities. "How familiar are you with network warfare principles and their application to air operations?" Before Sarah could respond, Rodriguez interjected with professional curiosity rather than competitive antagonism. "Sparrow's been full of surprises lately," he commented, his use of her Callsign carrying respect rather than mockery for the first time since their initial encounter. "I'm starting to think there's a lot we don't know about her tactical background." His observation reflected the broader squadron recognition that Sarah's capabilities demanded reassessment of assumptions about pilot education and tactical development. The conversation continued as other pilots began asking questions about advanced tactical concepts that Sarah's inquiry had introduced to their mission planning process. Her responses demonstrated familiarity with theoretical approaches to complex air operations that exceeded anything taught in standard pilot training, suggesting access to educational resources or practical experience that remained undocumented in her official records. The informal tactical seminar that developed around her insights provided more valuable education than many pilots had received through years of formal instruction. As the briefing concluded and pilots dispersed to complete their individual mission preparations, Sarah found herself surrounded by squadron mates seeking additional insights about the tactical concepts she had introduced. The transformation from squadron outsider to tactical mentor was complete, though the ultimate test of her capabilities in large force operations remained hours away. Her quiet confidence suggested readiness for challenges that would either validate her revolutionary approach to air combat or reveal limitations that individual engagements had failed to expose. The pre-dawn darkness at Thunderbolt Air Force Base hummed with activity as ground crews conducted final preparations for the largest training exercise in the facility's recent history. Floodlights illuminated rows of fighter aircraft representing multiple squadrons, their weapons pylons, loaded with sophisticated training munitions that would simulate the devastating firepower of actual combat operations. The scale of the exercise dwarfed anything Sarah had previously experienced, involving 48 aircraft, multiple air refueling tankers, and an electronic warfare environment so complex that even veteran pilots expressed concerns about mission complexity. Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection of aircraft 257 under the watchful eyes of maintenance personnel who had worked through the night to optimize her aging F-16 for the demanding mission ahead. The aircraft showed the accumulated stress of intensive training operations, but Staff Sergeant Martinez had performed mechanical miracles to ensure that every system would function within acceptable parameters during the critical engagement. The radar intermittency problems had been temporarily resolved through component replacements that would provide reliable performance for approximately 6 hours of operation. The mission briefing had revealed a scenario based on actual combat operations from recent conflicts, requiring the strike package to penetrate heavily defended airspace while maintaining formation integrity and achieving tactical objectives against realistic opposition. Sarah's 4-ship formation would face simulated surface-to-air missile systems, electronic warfare interference, and aggressive fighter opposition designed to replicate the most challenging air defense environments American pilots might encounter in actual combat. The exercise would test every aspect of pilot training, aircraft capability, and tactical coordination. Captain Rodriguez approached Sarah's aircraft, carrying his helmet bag and the focused expression of a pilot preparing for the most demanding mission of his career. Their partnership as flight lead and wingman had developed into a professional relationship based on mutual respect rather than the hierarchical authority that typically characterized military aviation. Rodriguez had spent hours studying Sarah's unconventional tactical approaches, recognizing that her methods might provide advantages in scenarios where traditional doctrine offered limited solutions. "Ready for the big show, Sparrow?" Rodriguez asked, using her Callsign with the respectful tone that had replaced his earlier mockery. His question carried genuine curiosity about how her individual capabilities would translate into effectiveness during large force operations that required unprecedented levels of coordination and tactical flexibility. The mission would test whether her defensive expertise could contribute to offensive operations involving multiple aircraft and complex objectives. Sarah nodded silently while securing her personal equipment and conducting final systems checks, her movements displaying the same methodical precision that had characterized her approach to flying since arriving at Thunderbolt. The mission ahead would present challenges unlike anything she had faced during individual engagements, requiring her to balance personal survival with formation responsibilities while contributing to overall mission success. Her grandfather's tactical philosophy would face its ultimate test in conditions that closely approximated actual combat operations. The engine start sequence proceeded smoothly across the flight line as 48 fighters spooled up their turbofan engines in preparation for the coordinated departure that would mark the beginning of the exercise. Radio communications crackled with professional efficiency as flight leaders coordinated with air traffic control, weather services, and mission commanders to ensure that the complex operation would proceed according to carefully rehearsed timelines. The sound of military aviation at full operational tempo created an atmosphere of controlled urgency that reminded everyone of the serious nature of their training. Sarah's formation received clearance to taxi as part of the second wave of aircraft, their position in the departure sequence providing tactical advantages that would be crucial during the initial phases of the mission. Rodriguez led their four-ship element with practiced confidence, his radio communications crisp and professional, as he coordinated with other formation leaders and controlling agencies. The taxi process alone required precise timing and coordination that demonstrated the complexity of large force operations. The takeoff sequence unfolded with military precision as formations departed at carefully calculated intervals designed to position them optimally for the subsequent air refueling operations that would extend their operational range into the exercise area. Sarah's aircraft performed flawlessly during the critical departure phase, her engine parameters remaining within normal limits despite the mechanical stress of maximum performance operations. The successful takeoff marked the beginning of a mission that would either validate or destroy her reputation as an innovative tactical thinker. Air refueling operations commenced over the Nevada desert as the strike package rendezvoused with KC-135 tanker aircraft that would provide the fuel necessary for extended operations in the target area. Sarah's experience with aerial refueling was limited compared to her squadron mates, yet she completed the complex maneuver with the same smooth precision that characterized all aspects of her flying. The successful fuel transfer eliminated range limitations that might have forced early mission termination due to insufficient fuel reserves. The first enemy contact occurred exactly as mission planners had predicted, with simulated surface-to-air missile sites activating their engagement radars as the strike package approached the initial penetration point. The electronic warfare environment immediately became intense as both sides employed sophisticated jamming systems designed to degrade enemy capabilities while protecting friendly operations. Sarah's aircraft responded well to the electronic threats, though her aging systems required constant monitoring to ensure continued effectiveness. Rodriguez implemented the tactical plan they had developed during mission planning, positioning their formation to exploit weaknesses in the simulated air defense network while maintaining coordination with other elements of the strike package. His leadership was confident and decisive, reflecting trust in Sarah's ability to execute her assigned role, despite the challenging conditions and her relative inexperience with large force operations. The formation maneuvered as a cohesive unit through the initial threat areas, The first simulated surface-to-air missile launch targeted Sarah's aircraft specifically, forcing her to implement defensive countermeasures while maintaining formation position and contributing to overall mission effectiveness. Her response incorporated the same unconventional techniques that had proven successful in individual engagements, but now she had to coordinate her defensive actions with 3 other aircraft, while avoiding interference with their tactical movements. The complexity of multi-aircraft defensive maneuvering tested her ability to apply individual skills to team operations. SAM launch, Sparrow is defensive. She transmitted over the formation frequency, alerting her wingman to her tactical situation while implementing countermeasures that created 3-dimensional flight paths designed to defeat the simulated missile's guidance system. Her defensive maneuvering was more aggressive than her formation mates had expected, yet it avoided disrupting their tactical positions while successfully negating the simulated threat. The defensive success maintained formation integrity while demonstrating tactical innovation. Aggressive enemy fighters appeared on radar as the strike package approached the primary target area, their simulated capabilities matching advanced foreign aircraft that represented realistic threats to American operations. The opposing pilots were experienced aggressor squadron personnel whose mission involved testing the strike package's ability to achieve tactical objectives while defending against coordinated attacks by skilled opponents. Their aggressive tactics would challenge every aspect of the formation's defensive capabilities. Sarah's role shifted from individual survival to formation defense as enemy fighters maneuvered to attack other members of her 4-ship element. Her position as the formation's most capable defensive pilot required her to coordinate protective maneuvers that would shield vulnerable aircraft while maintaining offensive capability against ground targets. The tactical challenge demanded simultaneous attention to multiple threats while preserving formation cohesion and mission effectiveness. The air combat that developed around the target area involved multiple engagements occurring simultaneously across 3 dimensions, creating tactical complexity that challenged even experienced pilots' ability to maintain situational awareness and effective coordination. Sarah found herself defending against multiple attackers while supporting her formation mates' offensive operations, requiring tactical multitasking that exceeded anything she had previously experienced. Her performance would determine not just her own survival, but the success of the entire formation's mission. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio, with urgent tactical information as he coordinated the formation's response to multiple simultaneous threats. "Sparrow, I need you to cover Phoenix while she engages the ground targets," he transmitted, assigning Sarah responsibility for protecting another pilot during the most critical phase of the mission. The trust implied in his tactical assignment reflected complete confidence in her defensive capabilities despite the unprecedented complexity of the tactical situation. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive, positioning her aircraft to intercept attacking enemy fighters while maintaining awareness of surface-to-air threats and coordination requirements with other formation elements. Her defensive maneuvering created protective corridors that allowed her wingman to complete the assigned attack mission while denying enemy fighters opportunities for successful engagements. The tactical coordination demonstrated capabilities that exceeded individual pilot skills to encompass formation-level tactical thinking. The mission continued for another 40 minutes as the strike package fought its way through multiple layers of opposition while achieving assigned tactical objectives. Sarah's performance throughout the complex operation had been flawless, contributing to formation success through defensive excellence and tactical innovation that protected her wingman while enabling mission accomplishment. Her transformation from squadron outcast to tactical leader was complete, though the formal recognition of her achievements would await the comprehensive mission debrief. When the formation finally returned to Thunderbolt Air Force Base, the preliminary assessments suggested that the exercise had been an overwhelming success despite the sophisticated opposition and challenging conditions. Sarah's contributions had been noted by mission commanders, formation leaders, and opposing forces who had struggled to achieve successful attacks against targets she was assigned to protect. Her reputation as an exceptional pilot was no longer limited to her squadron but had spread throughout the entire fighter community represented at the exercise. The secure conference room at the Pentagon buzzed with urgent activity as General Patricia Hawkins reviewed classified after-action reports from the Thunderbolt exercise that had concluded 48 hours earlier. The documents spread across her desk contained tactical analyses, pilot performance evaluations, and strategic assessments that painted a revolutionary picture of air combat capabilities previously unknown to Air Force leadership. Her secure phone had been ringing constantly with calls from squadron commanders, test pilot schools, and classified program directors who had heard rumors about a pilot whose performance defied conventional understanding of tactical limitations. Colonel Sterling entered the conference room carrying additional classified materials that had arrived overnight from various intelligence agencies and foreign liaison offices. "Ma'am, we're getting inquiries from Allied Air Forces about the tactical techniques demonstrated during the exercise," he reported, his expression mixing professional excitement with obvious concern about security implications. Apparently, several foreign observers who monitored the training frequencies are requesting information about innovative defensive methodologies that exceeded their theoretical performance models. The international attention reflected the unprecedented nature of Sarah's achievements during the large force exercise, where her defensive capabilities had protected not just her own formation, but had enabled mission success rates that surpassed historical norms by significant margins. Foreign military attaches who routinely monitored American training exercises had noted tactical innovations that challenged their understanding of air combat physics, leading to formal inquiries through diplomatic channels about whether the United States had developed revolutionary pilot training methods or classified technologies. General Hawkins studied classified video footage from the exercise that showed Sarah's aircraft maneuvering through threat environments with mathematical precision that seemed to violate basic principles of physics and aerodynamics. "This isn't just exceptional piloting," she observed, highlighting specific segments of the tactical display that demonstrated flight paths requiring computational abilities beyond human capacity. "She's calculating three-dimensional solutions to multivariable tactical problems in real time, while managing aircraft systems and coordinating with multiple formation elements simultaneously." The strategic implications extended far beyond individual pilot performance to questions of national security and technological advantage that could influence global military balance. If Sarah's capabilities could be understood, analyzed, and replicated through systematic training programs, the United States might possess tactical advantages that could revolutionize air warfare and provide decisive superiority in future conflicts. Conversely, if her methods became known to potential adversaries, American pilots might face opponents employing countermeasures designed to neutralize traditional tactical approaches. At Thunderbolt Air Force Base, Sarah sat in the squadron ready room completing after-action reports that documented her tactical decisions during the complex exercise. Her writing was methodical and precise, describing defensive maneuvers and coordination techniques in clinical terms that avoided revealing the theoretical foundations underlying her unconventional approaches. The reports would become part of her permanent record while contributing to institutional knowledge about advanced tactical possibilities that few pilots had previously demonstrated. Major Morrison approached her table, carrying a folder containing orders that would determine her future assignment and career trajectory within the Air Force structure. His expression mixed professional respect with genuine curiosity about a pilot who had fundamentally altered his understanding of tactical capabilities and pilot potential. the transformation in his attitude from initial skepticism to complete confidence reflected the broader institutional recognition that Sarah represented, something entirely new in military aviation. "Lieutenant Chen," Morrison began formally, though his tone carried warmth that hadn't existed during their earlier interactions. "I've received notification that your performance during the advanced training program has attracted attention at the highest levels of Air Force leadership. These orders will assign you to a position that reflects your unique capabilities and provides opportunities to contribute to institutional advancement." His announcement suggested recognition that exceeded typical career progression patterns. The orders contained assignment instructions that would transfer Sarah to the Air Force Weapons School at Deadliest Air Force Base, where she would serve as both a student in the advanced tactical curriculum and an instructor developing new defensive methodologies for dissemination throughout the fighter-pilot community. The dual role reflected institutional recognition that her knowledge required formal documentation and systematic teaching to maximize its value to overall Air Force effectiveness. Her quiet expertise would finally receive the official recognition it deserved. Sarah accepted the orders without visible emotion, though those who knew her well might have detected slight relaxation in her shoulders that suggested relief at finally being recognized for capabilities she had possessed throughout her career. "Thank you, sir," she replied simply, her characteristic understatement masking satisfaction at achieving assignment to an institution that valued tactical innovation over conventional approaches. The weapons school represented the pinnacle of fighter pilot education and tactical development within the Air Force structure. Rodriguez had been monitoring the conversation from across the ready room, and he approached Sarah's table carrying his own set of orders that contained surprising information about his future assignment. "Looks like we're both headed to Nellis," he announced with a grin that reflected genuine pleasure at the prospect of continued association with a pilot who had taught him more about air combat in 6 weeks than he had learned during his previous 8 years of flying. His assignment would allow him to study her methods systematically while contributing his own expertise to tactical development programs. The squadron gathered around Sarah's table as word spread about her assignment to the weapons school, their attitudes reflecting the complete transformation in respect and professional recognition that had occurred since her arrival at Thunderbolt. Pilots who had initially dismissed her as inadequately aggressive now sought opportunities to learn from someone whose tactical knowledge exceeded their collective experience. The social dynamics had reversed completely, with Sarah becoming the center of attention rather than the isolated outsider she had been for months. Captain Vasquez approached carrying a bottle of champagne that had appeared from someone's personal storage, her expression mixing celebration with professional admiration for achievements that had redefined squadron understanding of pilot capabilities. "This calls for a toast," she announced, addressing the assembled pilots with the kind of enthusiasm typically reserved for major promotions or combat decorations. "To Sparrow, who taught us that the deadliest pilot isn't always the loudest one." In the ready room, the informal celebration that developed around Sarah's assignment reflected genuine affection and respect that had replaced the earlier skepticism and dismissive attitudes. Her squadron mates had witnessed tactical innovations that challenged everything they thought they knew about air combat, leading to professional growth that would influence their own flying for the remainder of their careers. The education had been mutual, with Sarah learning about teamwork and leadership while teaching advanced defensive concepts. Sergeant Martinez joined the celebration carrying technical manuals that contained maintenance specifications for the aircraft systems Sarah would encounter at the weapons school. "You'll be flying some serious hardware at Nellis," she observed with professional satisfaction at seeing a pilot she respected receive recognition worthy of her capabilities. "Those aircraft will be worthy of your skills instead of holding you back like 257 has been doing." Her comment reflected the maintenance perspective that exceptional pilots deserved. Exceptional equipment. As the evening progressed and squadron members shared stories about missions they had flown with Sarah, the transformation in their understanding became increasingly apparent. What had seemed like impossible luck or unexplainable talent now revealed itself as the product of systematic preparation, theoretical knowledge, and tactical innovation that exceeded anything available through conventional training. Her methods had proven themselves. Under conditions that closely approximated actual combat operations, the conversation gradually shifted to tactical discussions, as pilots sought to understand principles underlying Sarah's defensive techniques, hoping to incorporate elements of her approach into their own flying. Her explanations were characteristically modest and technically precise, focusing on mathematical relationships and physical principles rather than dramatic descriptions of aerial combat. The informal seminar that developed provided more valuable tactical education than many pilots received through years of formal instruction. Major Morrison addressed the assembled squadron with remarks that formally recognized Sarah's contributions to their collective tactical education and mission effectiveness. What Lieutenant Chen has accomplished here represents more than individual achievement, he stated, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed genuine innovation. She's demonstrated that there are always new ways to approach old problems, and that the most important weapon in any aircraft is the mind of the pilot flying it. The recognition ceremony concluded with presentation of a squadron patch bearing Sarah's Callsign, though the mockery that had originally inspired the Sparrow designation had been completely transformed into respect for tactical capabilities that had proven decisively superior to conventional approaches. Her quiet demeanor and methodical approach had revealed themselves as strengths rather than weaknesses, providing lessons about judgment and leadership that would influence squadron culture long after her departure. As Sarah prepared to leave Thunderbolt for her new assignment at the weapons school, she carried with her the respect of pilots who had learned that effectiveness in air combat wasn't measured by volume or aggression, but by results achieved through preparation, innovation, and tactical excellence. Her transformation from dismissed outsider to respected expert was complete, though her greatest contributions to Air Force tactical development lay ahead at an institution specifically designed to identify and disseminate revolutionary approaches to aerial warfare. The quiet pilot with the mocked Callsign had become a legend, whose tactical innovations would influence fighter pilot training for decades to come, proving that sometimes the most dangerous opponents are those who approach combat with patience, precision, and profound understanding of the mathematical principles governing aerial engagement. Her legacy would extend far beyond individual achievement to institutional transformation that would save lives and win battles in conflicts yet to come. 5 years later, Colonel Sarah "Sparrow" Chen stood before a packed auditorium at the Air Force Academy, addressing the newest generation of fighter pilots. Behind her, a massive screen displayed her combat record: 47 confirmed air-to-air victories across 3 combat deployments, making her the deadliest pilot in modern Air Force history. The same Callsign that had once been whispered with mockery was now spoken with reverence throughout aviation circles worldwide. "Your aircraft doesn't make you dangerous," she told the eager cadets, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her trademark. "Your understanding of the mathematics of combat does. Every engagement is a physics problem waiting to be solved." The auditorium fell silent as she shared tactical insights that had revolutionized air combat doctrine. Her methods had been systematized into the Chen defensive matrix, now taught at every fighter pilot school globally. Former squadron mates, like Rodriguez, now a wing commander, credited their survival in recent conflicts to principles learned from the pilot they had once underestimated. The Veterans Outreach program she had helped fund through her early demonstration had expanded internationally, supporting thousands of combat veterans. As she concluded her lecture, Sarah noticed a young female cadet in the front row taking meticulous Notes in a worn notebook. Her quiet intensity reminiscent of another pilot who had once been dismissed for appearing too methodical, too patient, too different. Some legends are born from flash and thunder. Others emerge from precision, patience, and the deadly mathematics of aerial combat. If this incredible story of underestimation turned to dominance inspired you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more amazing tales of unlikely heroes who changed history. Share your own experiences of being underestimated in the comments below. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful messages. What extraordinary story should we explore next?